Well, it's hard to follow everything and apply it. And this one is just the weirdest. This is still the strangest topic I've ever come across as far as nutrition go. We've talked about some strange stuff. Yeah, we've had some weird lessons already. And this one, to me, again, is just one of the most weird. I do have a book giveaway for anybody who would like it. It's called The Plant Paradox. Just an interesting book. It's not one of my favorites. I'll talk about it a little bit later. If somebody wants it, I just found it. I didn't go out and buy it like I do some of the others to give away. But anyway, got that if somebody's interested. We'll talk about that in a minute. But again, I'll steal a quote from one of my podcast guests where he said, if you don't think this is weird, then I think that you are weird. And I thought this topic more than any other definitely kind of highlights that. So the title of the seminar today is called The Most Delicious Poison, which I stole from a book that just came out last year by the same title, The Most Delicious Poison. And it's all about different plants and chemicals that come from plants, why we like caffeine and tobacco and all kinds of different things that we end up sometimes getting addicted to. And really the book is about plants and how plants interact with each other, how they compete with each other, how they cooperate with each other. It's a great book. It's very, very interesting. It's not a nutrition book. It's just more like a botany book that's just interesting to hear about. If you go to your garden, Margie, for an example, and you cut a tomato plant, it communicates with other plants that it was cut. And it's just fascinating how they can come up with that kind of stuff. But anyway, it's not, again, like a nutrition book.
It signals, let's grow more.
Yep.
Because I heard this about roses the other day. And it signals we've got to produce more
Yep.
roses so we can produce more seed.
Yep. Yeah, they're fascinating. The plants are very, very, very smart, and they've been around a lot longer than we have, and they've developed different kind of mechanisms. One thing that comes up in this book over and over and over and over again is the kind of idea that like these plants have things that they do that have nothing to do with you. You don't have to take it personally. They don't care about you. They don't care. They care about themselves, and they're just like any other life on Earth. What plants want to do is exactly what you said with a rose bush. It wants to make more seeds. It wants to propagate. It wants to live. No living creature wants to die, whether it's an animal or a plant. And so, again, you don't have to take it personally that plants are trying to fight against you and against predation from insects and other animals and rodents and all kinds of stuff. That's what they've developed. So the first thing we're going to talk about is that just 101. This is called botany, and it's called All Plants Have Toxins. Every plant has toxins. Period. That's not to say that every plant can't be enjoyed or consumed or used for some purpose. Part of what animals do and what we do as humans is we learn how to take substances that come from plants and use them to our advantage. It's how we have medicine, pharmaceuticals. It's how we made food and all this stuff. And so it's not that we can't get around the toxins and we can't use them, and there's certain levels of toxins in different plants and that kind of thing. So it's not always a bad thing. It's just a fact of life that all plants have toxins. That just is what it is. Plants will want you, they will either reward you for doing something that is beneficial to them, or they will potentially harm you for doing something that harms them. It's part of their defensive chemical system. So this is a good time to talk about the difference between fruits and vegetables. We say that in a phrase, fruits and vegetables, like it's all one thing. And they're very, very, very different. So a fruit is the part of the plant that has the seeds. It's usually very brightly colored and very tasty for whatever creature is going to use it. And it basically at a certain time of the year becomes ripe and edible so that things can eat it. But it benefits the plant because you are going to then have seeds in you. Your digestive system is very poor at digesting seeds by design by the plants. And now, unfortunately, the plant doesn't know that the seed is going to end up in a ceramic bowl, ironically, but it should end up somewhere out in nature where the plant can propagate. So right off the bat, to say fruits, generally speaking, reward the animal, creature, whatever that consumes it plants and fruits, generally speaking, the fruit category has very, very, very low toxins. Usually not a very toxic load to different fruits. Some are different than others, but generally speaking, most fruits that you can consume are generally, again, pretty safe. The thing that most people need to realize about fruits is we have changed our fruits quite drastically over the years, so they're no longer what kind of fruits you would find in nature. In my neighborhood, I know of a few fruit trees where fruit is growing, and it just doesn't look like anything you can find in the grocery store. It's just very, very, very different. So that said, it's still a more safe plant for more people to consume. The vegetables are really the parts of the plant that make up the stems, the leaves, the stalks, the roots, the seeds. These are different parts of the plants that really the plant is trying to fortify and protect as much as possible. So that's what most vegetables are.
I'm seeing that about fruits too, because it has variety. So I was thinking the toxin might be the outer part of the plant that we don't eat. We get rid of it.
Yeah.
But the vegetable, there's different variety of those parts, so that if one isn't good, you have another.
Yes, that's very true. And we'll talk about that today as far as like which plants are the most toxic that we consume and which ones are the least. And you can make very simple substitutions and potentially help yourself out by not overloading yourself on certain toxic loads. But yes, every plant has different strategies. We take our toxins in different amounts. So for example, you can have a very small amount of cyanide, not die. If you have too much, you die. So the dose makes the poison. If you have too much, it can be a lot. But again, the vegetables are the parts of the plant that the parts are generally going to be more protected by the plant itself. And these are, again, toxins. They're chemicals. We sometimes call them phytochemicals, meaning chemicals that come from plants. Some people call them phytonutrients and make the argument that in small doses, these things might be beneficial. That might be true. I think we have a lot to learn about that. And again, this conversation is not to say that you shouldn't ever consume plants. Like, you should have plants. They could be part of a healthy diet. We just want to eat them in a very, very safe way, which is what this book is all about, called Eat Like a Human by Dr. Bill Schindler. Fabulous book, where he talks about a lot of these things. And the first chapter talks about, it's called Asking the Right Questions, not just what, but how. And he makes this point that humans are a little bit weird in that we don't really look like herbivores, but we also don't really look like carnivores. And it's interesting to contemplate that we're kind of this like hairless, kind of weak, kind of a weird animal where we don't like run the fastest, we don't have claws or fangs, we don't really jump the highest. Like, there's nothing really that special about us, and our digestive system is actually quite weak. And can't digest a lot of either vegetation or things like raw meat the way other animals can. And it's really strange to think about this not very special creature, but also this creature just met for the Paris Olympics from all over the world, traveled to one place, had so many different events and swimming and running and jumping, and like that we're able to travel and compete in all kinds of different things and throwing events and cycling events and all this stuff. Like, no other animal really does that. No other animal has gone to the moon. Quite strange that such a weak animal could also accomplish so much. And the thing that really changed us as a species is when we as a species hit two rocks together and made a tool. When we had tools, basically technology made us who we are. It's about how we adapted and made us who we are as creatures. And so when you think technology, you might be thinking about computers and phones, and that certainly is technology, the internet, but we don't often think about a knife. We can make a kitchen knife that is vastly stronger and sharper than any things that we could grow. We also learned how to tame fire, and we invented things like pots and pans, and we can cook things. Is a big thing that makes us human. No other animal really cooks their food. And so we use technology to detoxify plants and to treat our food basically before we consume it. So we're actually like pre-digesting things before it gets into our body. We've also learned other technologies such as soaking and fermenting and cooking, like I said, baking. lots of different ways to filter things, and yeah, we've used technology to make plant foods more consumable and help things like meat become more absorbable because we cook it. So that's very unique for us. So when it comes to plants, essentially, like we said, we want to make sure we know which plants have which toxins and how we can detoxify them so they're safe and they're bioavailable for us. So the next kind of topic that you're going to see is called deficiencies and surpluses. This really applies the most to people who eat a more plant-based diet, or are just either not getting sufficient animal foods in their diet, or they're getting too much of the toxic plants in their diet. And so we're going to go through just a few of the essential nutrients that people with deficiencies are not going to get. So by consuming a lot of plants, these are the things you're going to become deficient in. Right off the bat, B vitamins, including and especially B6. Vitamin B6 is not found in any plant food. B vitamins, and in particular B12, is a huge deficiency that we deal with now, and can develop a lot of like really serious like brain deficiencies. Vegans, people who choose not to eat any animal products at all, they have to supplement. So since supplementation of vitamins were only a recent kind of discovery, and supplements were not a thing that you could do many years ago, being vegan is now something that you can do. You just have to supplement. Vitamin D3 is something that we get from the sun, but is also found in animal foods. It's an essential nutrient that you also don't get from plant foods. People that eat a high plant-based diet usually are very deficient in calcium. Iron and zinc are some of the big ones. We've talked about essential fats, and EPA and DHA in particular that comes from animal foods. Plant foods don't contain those nutrients, so people get really deficient in that. Cholesterol is a big one. We hopefully have made a convincing case that cholesterol is a nutrient. Your body makes it. Every cell of your body makes it. It's completely necessary for life. And just because you stop eating it doesn't mean your body stops making it. That's how important it is. But you have a greater likelihood of being deficient in cholesterol if you don't consume it. A lot of smaller nutrients like carnosine, creatine, iodine, taurine, vitamin A, vitamin K2, choline. All of these are really important nutrients that are not found in very high quantities or at all in plant foods. A big one that I also put here that you can find in plant foods is protein. Protein is found in lots of different plant foods. It's found in its more complete form in animal foods. But in the plant varieties, the version that we get is usually incomplete, so you have to combine lots of different foods to get the protein that you need. Another consideration is if you wanted to get a sufficient amount of protein from something like chickpeas, you can do that, but you would have to eat somewhere around 3 cups of chickpeas, which would also have 1,400 calories total and several grams of carbohydrates. You get other things along with the protein, not just the protein, which makes it very, very difficult to get the adequate amount of protein that you need. Those are just some of the deficiencies that we can have when we're eating too many of these plants. We're gonna talk about some other deficiencies here in a minute, but just for now, we're gonna leave it at that list. Things that we have surpluses in is the other thing. So not only can we not get enough of a lot of different things by eating tons of plant, but we also build up a lot of stuff that we get way too much of. One of the big things that we're eating way too much of today is soy. Soy is in everything, and it's basically can affect your hormones, especially mimicking estrogen, so your body can't use estrogen as a hormone and cause all kinds of different problems. I know lots of people who say the biggest benefit of going more towards an animal-based diet or eating more meat in particular is that you're at the very least eliminating soy. It's the number one oil that we use as well, so that's a good segue into seed oils. We talked about the 3 ingredients that I recommend most people try to minimize as much as possible. One of them was seed oils, one of them was sugar, and one of them was refined grains. All of them come from plants. So none of those are animal foods. Ultra-processed foods, we know, are the foods we don't often talk about, but they're the bulk of what we consume. Ultra-processed foods are everything you find in the middle part of a grocery store. Boxes, bags, cans, things that are very shelf-stable and stay good for a really, really long time is ultra-processed. We know that we get way too much of that, and those foods are designed to be maximally appealing to us and addictive, where they have almost no nutrients, and make us very, very hungry and, again, addicted to food. Surpluses also can include fake meat and meat analogs that we have started inventing. The Seventh-day Adventist Church members invented the first fake meat that came out over a century ago, but now Beyond Meat and Impossible Burgers and things like that have kind of brought that more to the forefront, although they are really, like, their stocks are tanking and the popularity is really dropping off. And this one's controversial. I decided...
But that's also because everybody's been told meat is bad for you. Bad, bad, bad.
Yes.
So we're finding alternatives. So they probably are doing it in the right sense, but it's still bad. Just like soy, I never heard of soy until maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But then it was good. This is so good for you.
Remember
and then
that.
Suddenly we're hearing, no, this is bad.
It's actually really not great. Yeah, I know.
Hard to keep up with it.
It really is. It's really hard to keep up with. And again, some of these messages are so ubiquitous, we don't ever question them. Like, to say you should take a look at the amount and the type of vegetables that you consume in your diet, and you shouldn't just eat as many as you want all the time. Again, that's weird. That's a weird statement that goes completely against what any of us have really been told. I've been trying to deep dive into this a little bit more and came across a book called The Stone Age Diet, which is a very esoteric book that was written in the 70s. It got a lot of things right. I thought it was very, very interesting. And it talked about how in the 1910s, we first started noticing what ended up being vitamin deficiencies. We didn't know what vitamins were. And there were certain populations that were changing the amount of food that they were eating. I want to say population in Asia was changing the way they were polishing their rice, and they were just like taking out some of the hulls of rice, and it was, I mean, it made it more delicious, but at the same time it took out a key nutrient that they ended up later identifying as vitamin B6, which is thiamine, and the nutrient deficiency that they identified is called beriberi. And they found that if they just reintroduced more B6, more of this thiamine into the diet, that these people with vitamin deficiencies wouldn't be deficient anymore. And so this was kind of the birth of, like, okay, what are vitamins? This is cool. Like, we identified B6 and vitamin C and vitamin D and all these different things. But what it did was it shifted the conversation more towards fruits and vegetables, I'm sorry, not fruits and vegetables, but vitamins and minerals. As being this thing that you wanted to make sure that if some was good, more is better, and if you don't get enough vitamins, you're going to be deficient in it. Nobody ever really thought about this before, but it started to get kind of proposed and got into magazines and started to become something that people were more interested in. And the story he tells, I believe, is a fictitious one, but it also illustrates the point, and I think it's really plausible of how this could have maybe started and changed the way we think of our food and our food system. So he describes a woman walking into a general store in 1920 and looking around at all the products there were in this store. Maybe there were, breads and things in boxes and bags, cans especially. But when she went to the fresh produce section, again, February in New York City wouldn't have fresh produce. So maybe she found a few potatoes that were growing the roots that grow off of them, or maybe found a few apples that were quite bruised and going bad quickly. And as she asked the store manager where she can find fresh tomatoes, the store manager says to her, like, I mean, it's February in we don't have, it's New York, like, we don't have fresh tomatoes. That was like months ago. And the woman getting quite incensed because she had just read in a magazine that if she didn't get vitamin C into her kid, the kid would become vitamin deficient. And fresh tomatoes are a great source of vitamin C. And so as he's telling this story, he also tells it in a way that in the store as well was somebody who was distributing groceries all along the East Coast and maybe overheard this conversation and thought, well, this is strange. Why is this woman asking about a type of food that is not available here and now? And as he's driving down the coast and delivering all the different foods to the different general stores and distributing everything, he found that in the southern United States in February, they had a great surplus of things like tomatoes. And he wondered, if this person has a truckload of tomatoes that they're trying to get rid of, and he's offering me like $20. You can take this entire truckload. Could have wondered to himself, I wonder if there's a way that I could get this from the southern part of the United States to the northern part of the United States, because those people up there are now looking for this food and they're willing to pay a lot of money for this. At the time, you think the 1920s, travel would have been very difficult. Cars were not the same as what they are today. We didn't have interstates. Roads would have been nuts to try to kind of navigate and figure out. But you thought, if I can buy these tomatoes, transport them in the cold where they'll stay fresh, maybe I can take them and sell them on the street in New York City and make some money. And so sure enough, the guy decided to try it, takes all his fresh tomatoes he bought for $20, maybe he sold them for $2,000, made tons of money, and this may have been the beginning of transportation of things like produce. Quite lucrative, there was a market for it, people wanted it, and you know, over time we built our roads to be better, we built better trucks, and all these things that now we don't hardly think at all about seeing tomatoes in grocery stores year round, but that had to be invented somehow. And I thought that the story was very interesting to see, like, oh, now we're consuming these fruits and vegetables. They were so seasonal, but now we consume them all the time, and how that may have started. But anyway, I digress. One of the things that I put in surpluses, again, this one's going to sound really weird, and it is debatable, but from what I've seen and noticed, I would say fiber. I think we way overconsume fiber in our diets. I know that's not a very popular opinion with a lot of people, and a lot of people know that, or they're told by doctors or medical professionals they need to add more fiber to the diet. I only noticed that a lot of people have a lot of problems when they add more fiber. The company I used to work for, we used to sell a detox kit, and it would come with psyllium husk fiber, I want to say, which is a fiber supplement you would add to water. Again, the point was to help people, quote unquote, detox, and we would give it to people, and it made a lot of people very sick. We'll talk about this later in this episode, but I know a lot of people that have fully eliminated fiber from their diet and their digestion has never been better. So again, a little bit debatable on whether that's an essential nutrient. It's definitely not essential as far as the body goes. We don't use it. It can feed the bacteria in the large intestine. Even that is quite debatable whether it's something that we need. But I put fiber as something that we can get a surplus of when we're eating too many of the plant foods. So again, just to say, like, when you consume a lot of these things, you're going to get too many of things and you're going to get too little of certain things. There's three things that you will get a surplus of in the plant world that really stand out as some of the superstars of plant toxins. These things tend to look like they make the most harm, and they're in the most different kinds of foods. And the first one I want to talk about is so strange. It's called oxalate. Have you heard of oxalate? Okay.
Yep.
Oxalate.
Because that's what the problem is with Wade and his kidney stones.
Ha.
But then the problem I always have is if you have this one illness, you need to eat this way.
Yep.
But then if you have this illness, you need to avoid that
Yep.
food that you
Yep.
need with the other. And it's just so confused.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, oxalates. Oxalates are, you can kind of think of them as coming in two forms. And the first form is on the picture on the actual paper that I handed out. These are oxalate crystals. So this is what oxalate looks like in a microscope. One very high oxalate food that most people know and have had in their diets is spinach. We've given a full pass to anybody to eat as much spinach as they like. We put it into smoothies. We blend it up. We have it in salads. We don't tend to cook it as much like we used to anymore. And I think most people can relate to the fact if you take a piece of spinach and you chew it, just raw, and you chew it, there's a mouthfeel that you get that's kind of, I don't know. It's I kind of, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It feels like kind of rough almost. I'll describe it as almost feeling like kind of your mouth after like, I don't know. It just, something feels like gritty, I guess. And what you're tasting, that mouthfeel, is the actual crystals that the plant uses. Have you ever grown spinach?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. I don't think it yields a lot, but I think it's easy to grow. Doesn't it grow pretty well and doesn't get eaten by plants as much, or by insects?
I would think so.
Okay. Part of the reason.
You've got to pick those right away, or they're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
go bad.
Part of the reason why I think they're easy to grow, I don't think they yield as much, like I said, but I don't know a ton of people who grow them. But one of the reasons why insects don't eat them is because these crystals act as a physical barrier that really will like rip up an insect's mouth. Again, we're humans, we've got a much greater tolerance for these types of things, but the thing that makes most plant toxins very sneaky is they can accumulate, and they do so over the course of a really, really long time. So it's not something that most people consume and automatically they get punished for doing it. It's something that only manifests itself years and years down the road. Some people detoxify things better than others, so what harms one might not harm the other. So it gets complicated. So that's a mechanical form of oxalate. The really harmful component of oxalate is actually the chemical form of oxalate, which is a form of oxalate that gets into the bloodstream, starts circulating around, and it's an ion, meaning an ion is always seeking to bond with a mineral like calcium, magnesium, iron, and once it does, the body wants to try to hold on to it so it doesn't damage itself. And these crystals can build up over a great amount of time. So these crystals can manifest in the joints, especially in bone tissue. They definitely accumulate any place that you can excrete. Body can't use oxalate, so you have to get it out of the body. So if you wake up with eye crusties in the morning, there's a good chance that came from oxalates coming out in the eyes. If you suffer from belching or burping, you may notice that comes from oxalate being released through the lungs. The kidneys are a place where oxalate can build up because you can pee out oxalate, which is where kidney stones originate from. Most kidney stones do have oxalate as a component of that. You'll notice if you ever are peeing and it's kind of cloudy, you might be expelling oxalate that way. Sexual organs can definitely build up there. The joints we already mentioned. And these can be highly, highly, highly problematic. There's a list of high oxalate foods on the right. So raspberries, dark chocolate, unfortunately, Swiss chard, buckwheat, tofu, miso, and other soya foods, spinach, potatoes and yam, wheat bran, black tea, beans, rhubarb, nuts and seeds, and beets. These are all the parts of the plant, of those particular plants, that have the most oxalate. I never tell people that there are certain foods that they should eat or shouldn't eat as a blanket statement, except for one, and that's spinach. I think spinach is one of the most toxic foods that is in our diet, that doesn't really taste that great anyway, and that has lots of very much less toxic alternates that people can be eating. I tell people across the board, as weird as it sounds, I would not eat spinach. I think, again, you can find so many different substitutes. It is eye-wateringly high in oxalate. Your body can excrete somewhere around 125 to 150 milligrams of oxalate in a day. And a serving of spinach has like 1,000. It's way, way, way more than we can get rid of.
So how does it compare to the Swiss chard?
Swiss chard is better. Swiss chard is better. Even things like kale.
Does spinach tastes better than a Swiss chard?
I think spinach tastes better.
That's what I'm
Yeah. Ironically, kale does not have a lot of oxalate. Might have other things in it that aren't great, but kale is a good alternative to oxalate. I think most versions of like baby kale are so much better that you can get. There would be different options. Hello.
Hi.
How are you? We're just on the bottom part now.
Oh, okay.
We are talking about plant toxins, and 3 of them in particular. The one we're talking about now is called oxalates. Have you ever heard of oxalates? Okay.
No.
Jump right in. Oxalates are under a microscope. Look like that picture on the lower left. So that's how oxalates are in plants. It's a way that a plant can protect itself, and they're crystals. and these crystals get into our tissues and build up over a great amount of time until we can excrete them and get rid of them. We're just talking about the high oxalate foods on the right-hand side, and the one food that I recommend that nobody eats across the board, spinach. I don't think anybody should be consuming spinach. It's the one of any one food, that is the one food I tell people you should avoid, like the plague.
Wow.
And
I thought that was supposed to be one of the best.
having that reaction perfectly illustrates how strange it is to be talking about some of these things. With a lot of these different foods, there are tons and tons and tons of alternatives that have a way lower load in oxalate in particular, and some of these other compounds as well. On the references, I attached a few podcast episodes. All of them are authors who have written extensively about this. The second one down is a woman named Sally Kate Norton. She is an angel. I met her in person, got to hang out with her. She's absolutely wonderful. And the name of her book, I think, is brilliant, called Toxic Superfoods. Foods that we have been told are the very best, healthiest foods that you can be eating that are actually toxic. Very, very strange, amazing book, very strong argument against that. And yeah, the cover of her book is incredible. It's got a big red X, and then it's all these amazing, this rainbow of colors of all the dark chocolate and the chard and the rhubarb and the kiwis, very high in oxalate, and the nuts and seeds, sweet, everybody's favorite health food, sweet potatoes, spinach. Almonds are a big one. Almonds are not, well, nuts and seeds are on here, but almonds is very high in oxalate. And it is to say that you can really, 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 really mess up your health over the number of several years by over-consuming these types of foods. If you think about the way spinach, like I've asked my grandparents, like, did you guys consume spinach when you were growing up? And they said yes. And I was like, oh, that kind of surprised me. But they said, like, but you couldn't get it all year. It was like we talked about with the tomatoes. Like, you don't have them all year. When you have them, you can eat them, but you can't save spinach.
We ate spinach, but it was in a can. It was brown, overcooked, but that's the way it comes.
Yeah. Yep.
And but then it was also Popeye.
Yep.
The kind of Popeye, eat the spinach, you'll be strong, get
Yep.
the iron
Yep.
you need or whatever. So
traditionally, we knew these things, and traditionally we figured out ways to deal with some of this stuff. We knew that people in England in the 1800s got sick every time rhubarb came on because they were already drinking tea as part of their custom. Then they were eating rhubarb pie, and people were getting really, really sick because they were eating too much of these high oxalate foods all at once. That's how we figured out it wasn't the best thing. But we learned cuisines, you cook your spinach. That helps. What is spinach served with? Oftentimes, cooked spinach is served with some type of a cream sauce. We talked about how oxalate wants to bind with and find minerals. There's lots of minerals in cream. Calcium is in cream. That's the way we would have consumed it. I'll never forget. When this was a healthy snack, my mom gave it to me, and she would squeeze lemon on top of it and maybe add just a little bit of salt. Salt was still pretty bad. But the lemon, the citrate in the lemon helps with the binding and detoxifying of oxalate. Like, those two things go together and they taste good together to a human, most likely because they can help deal with the oxalates and some of the other plant toxins. So you can find substitutions, you can cook with these things, you can prepare these things in different ways that make them safer. A few really weird things right off the bat: if you do cook with these in a pot, get rid of the water. These next two statements, my mom is rolling in her grave over, because the healthiest thing you could do is keep the pot going with all these healthy ingredients. Cooking can help extract some of these things you don't want in your body, and you don't want to put them back. So ditch the water anytime you're cooking these things. The second thing, again, my mom would lose her mind if she heard me say this: do not eat skins of potatoes. In particular, skins of foods, in particular potatoes.
See, I always heard,
Always.
that's where the vitamins are.
That's where the vitamins are.
Oh, wow.
The healthiest
I
part.
shouldn't eat any of the potatoes.
Oh.
Wow.
The skins are the most highly fortified and protected part of that particular plant. This author, Dr. Bill Schindler, like literally says that Sally Norton, that other author I was telling you about, saved his life because he was eating almonds by the handful, and he was eating spinach. His whole thing was traveling around the world to find the most nutritious cuisines that people could eat, and found that he was ruining his health by eating healthy, quote unquote, healthy foods like spinach and almonds in particular. His joint pain went away after he stopped consuming these foods. No more joint pain. And again, as we mentioned, the joints are where a lot of these crystals can build up in our bones and cause a lot of problems. Also stealing this from Sally Norton, but I'll say that if you feel like you have done all the things, I'll see this sometimes in like women in their like 30s and 40s who look like they're doing all the things. They're doing all the smoothies, they're eating all the salads, they are doing all the workouts. They appear to be healthy, but there's always something wrong. The joints always hurt. Their thyroid is always goofed up. They always have autoimmune Hashimoto's or something, like skin issues or digestive problems. Like, this person is healthy, but why are they dealing with so many things? If that is the case, oxalate may be to blame. So again, very, very strange, really weird to bring this up. This is one of the topics that, like, seriously, people think I'm growing a second head out of my shoulders when I tell them that, like, spinach is not healthy for you.
Yeah. Oh my god.
I know. Yeah, sweet potatoes, yams. Again, the dose makes the poison. So not all plants have toxins, but we don't consume all of them in a level that is toxic. Some are better than others. There are so many, again, easy substitutions that you can make. Lettuces, fine. Kale, fine. Doesn't have as much of the oxalate. If you still want to consume some of those things, very easy to find those lists. Her website in particular is very, very helpful, has a lot of really good information, but oxalate is a weird one. Also, I will say, if you in particular are coming from a vegetarian or vegan background where you have eaten a lot of these things daily, you can't just eliminate these out of your diet. You have to treat it like a baby who is asleep in the room, and you have to back out of them very, very quietly. People will learn about how much they screwed up their health with these things, and they will want to stop eating oxalate right at once. When you stop consuming oxalate that the body has been holding on to, causing all these issues, once you stop, it finally gets the chance to say, finally, amazing, it's winter time, there's no more spinach, get it out. Get it all out, and it will dump. It's called an oxalate dump, and it will dump all of this stuff all at once and cause severe issues. I've got a really good friend. He goes by the Carnivorist online. We've exchanged podcast interviews. He was vegan for 7 or 8 years, nearly killed himself, literally got down to like 127 pounds. A moped fell on him, and he couldn't even lift off the moped. He found Sally Norton's material, found out how damaging oxalate were, where he was doubling down on smoothies he was making every single day and just getting sicker and sicker and sicker. Pictures of this dude are gnarly. But he decided to ditch these foods, and to this day, every few months, his body will go through a dumping cycle, and it's like the crusties in the eyes, or he'll pass a stone, or his joints will kill him. It's brutal. It's absolutely brutal.
But then people will think, well, maybe I'm not eating right, so I'll ditch what I'm doing because it's making me hurt.
Yep.
But it's trying to get rid of it.
Yep. It's your body getting rid of it. Your body can use other of these substances, like we're going to talk about phytic acid and lectins as an example. We won't spend too much time there, but your body can kind of detoxify those a little bit, not with oxalate. Oxalate, it has to get rid of. It has to.
Lectins, beans.
Yeah. Very good. Yep. So that is one that your body has to excrete to get rid of, and it can be quite a painful process. Again, this is not to take it personally. It's just that plants have different chemical defenses, and it's trying to not get eaten. It's not trying to attack you. It has very little to do with you. These were here a long time before you were. But when we have this very entitled feeling of like, we can just eat as much spinach as we want, we can pick as much rhubarb as we want. We can take almonds and make it into this entire industry and sell people giant bags of almonds at Costco that don't have the shell, and you can make almond flour products and almond milk. It comes at a price. We can't just do that.
Almond milk's not.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I would. Again, a small amount. Maybe you'll do okay with it.
Oat milk?
Maybe slightly better for that. I just don't think. I wish we would call it juice when it comes from plants versus calling it a milk, because it's just such a different kind of product.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people that turn to those because they don't do well with milk, but I don't think the alternatives tend to be much better for a lot of people.
Or it's more that they've heard. You need
Yeah,
to do it.
yes.
So what is a good, I like milk, so, I mean, what is a good,
If you can tolerate milk well, I think the most natural version of milk that you like a whole milk. Some people do really, really well on raw milk. It's hard to find, in some states is illegal, which is a little bit weird, but very true.
yeah.
I know they sell it at the Utah meat and milk farms. Some people do well with that. A lot of times people find that there's an addictive nature to kind of dairy or cheese in particular, and they start and they can't stop. Or also I'll notice like a lot of like sinus or skin issues with too much milk or dairy, where for some people they just don't tolerate it as well. It's kind of a 50-50 thing.
Yeah.
Some people have to eliminate it.
Doesn't, but she does other stuff, but like the skim, 1%, 2%, it's better to drink whole.
I would rather have somebody drink whole because it has less of the sugar, more of the fat. At least the fat is giving you some nutrients.
Yeah.
What we do this funny thing where we take stuff out of food and then we fortify it. So like flour has no nutrients, so you put flour in bread and then we fortified it with minerals. Well, it's like we took the minerals out of the original food and then we just add it back in later as a fortification and then say, oh, this has so much iron or zinc or whatever. If this is really good for you, well, it's like, well, is it that good? Or do we just add in something we just took away and now we made the whole process more expensive, or now this food is shelf stable? Like we've talked about this in the past. I used to make bread and it was delicious. It was sourdough bread. It was awesome. But like it goes bad in like a day or two, like hard as a rock. I could buy Wonder Bread. It would probably still be soft in a few years. Like you see people that save a McDonald's hamburger for literally like 10, 15, 20 years and it looks exactly the same. Like none of it has changed. So yeah, it's a good question. Again, if you're going to continue eating some of those foods, a good way to detoxify them is to cook them. You can soak them, ferment them. I still do have some vegetables in my diet, but they're fermented. I have a few bites of either kimchi or of sauerkraut, and it's really good and it's very potent. Like 2 or 3 bites is like good enough for me. And it's like we've taken that plant food and we've detoxified it through fermentation. Much, much safer, much better tolerated for a lot of people. Again, what makes us human is the ability to prepare our foods outside of the body so we make them safe and detoxified for when we consume them. Oxalate's a tricky one. Just be aware of that. And again, lots of resources now out there from people who are doing amazing work. Interesting book, The Plant Paradox. So now we're talking about lectins. So this Dr. Stephen Gundry. I'll just read a few excerpts from this. Lectins 1 as hard as it may have been now, the earth was once inhabited solely by plants. Insects only arose about 340 million years ago. They shook the peaceful plant ecosystem to its core, and plants needed to start to develop some defenses. They didn't want to get eaten by insects, and so they had to defend themselves. Mainly, they cause injury to creatures that eat them. Plants have short-term defenses like immediately poisoning, paralyzing, or entrapping predators. They also have long-term defenses like making the creatures that eat them slowly become sick. That's one thing that soy does, as we were talking about soy, is it literally will attack your reproductive system and make it so you can't have babies anymore. Like, it's savage the way soy works. And again, it's nothing personal to humans. It's just we eat a lot of soy, and it does that to any...
I always thought years ago soy was...
That's the best.
I love soy sauce. And
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
darn.
I know. Well, soy sauce, again, in such a small quantity, probably is a lot less problematic. And a true soy sauce is fermented. If you've ever seen, the documentary Chef's Table, they go to different like amazing restaurants all around the world. And one place they go to in South Korea is an actual monk, a monastery And she uses soy sauces that are literally fermented over 100 years,
Oh.
like stored in the ground, 100-year-old soy sauces. They look like syrup. They're like so thick and whatever, but it's fermented, so it takes out a lot of the stuff that's nasty
Yeah.
in the soy sauce.
So, okay. So
Um,
mine is good. No,
Small amounts, again, the
I mean,
dosage
they
poisons.
ferment. I mean, yeah.
Yep.
I mean,
It's how we use technology to deal with toxins in foods.
yeah.
Lectins are long-term defense strategy. They're found in all plants, but are highly concentrated in only a few. When eaten, these plants cause insects and higher animals alike enough discomfort to typically avoid consuming high lectin foods in the future. So this whole book is about how toxic some of these foods are. This is the no list from lectins. So these are the foods that he doesn't recommend. While you're listening to this, just want you to be thinking, like, what other foods are left? Barley grains, bread, cereal, cookies, crackers, pasta, pastries, potatoes, potato chips, tortillas, wheat flour, white rice. If you want to follow these recommendations, you just eliminated a lot of food. Barley, buckwheat, but these are all just grains. I'm not even going to read all this, but basically any grains are high in lectins. Sugar is a big one. These four different pages. Bunch of different sweeteners. He does list a bunch of vegetables, including beans, lentils, chickpeas, edamame, where a lot of people would be consuming a lot of soy sauce would be also edamame. So soy protein both made the list. Legumes, lentils, pea protein, peas, tofu is on there. Almonds, not only high in oxalate but high in lectins. Peanuts, pumpkins, pumpkin seed, bunch of different fruits, including tomatillos, tomatoes, melon, goji berry, cucumbers, cheese, cottage cheese. For milk is on there. Sorry, we're talking about milk, high in lectins. Oils, all the plant oils. So canola oil, corn oil, cottonseed oil, grapeseed, peanut, safflower, soy, sunflower, anything marked vegetable oil. And there's even a few herbs and seasonings that it mentions. Those are all the things on the no list. The whole point of this book is to tell you how toxic plants are, and yet still makes the argument that you should be eating a very high plant diet, which is why the thing is called the plant paradox. So here's a recipe in here, almond joy muffins. So it recommends, after the whole book saying like plant toxins are a thing and they defend themselves and they can build up and cause damage, like here's a recipe for almond joy muffins. The first ingredient is almond meal. Almond meal might be lower in lectins, but it's super high in oxalate. I don't understand. I don't understand how you could write this book and say that, yeah, plants are toxic and so you should eat a lot of them. I don't get it. So again, I found this in my neighborhood. If anybody wants it and they want to read it, it's a book giveaway. You can have it. The things you'll notice with lectins in particular, they get into the gut, and the connection between the gut and the brain is very strong. So the biggest association is like gut issues, leaky gut. In particular, if you've heard of that, where basically things that shouldn't get into your bloodstream, make it into your bloodstream, and then cause your body to do an autoimmune response where it attacks itself. And you have issues there. I also think issues in the brain, including brain fog, are big ones. The last of our three superstars of plant toxins is phytic acid. Basically, this is something that blocks absorption of different foods. So the most classic study of this, they fed people oysters. And if you ate the oysters alone, which is high in zinc, you absorb like 100% of the zinc that you were consuming from the oysters. If you had the oysters with corn tortillas, which are high in phytic acid, the absorption rate went down to about half. And when you added black beans, the absorption of zinc went to about 0. So they are things that block different nutrients that your body needs, and you end up excreting them and not absorbing them into the body. It's a way that plants protect themselves, and they get into the body and make it so you don't use particular nutrients that you could really benefit from.
So you should be taking zinc or having zinc in your...
You can have zinc in your diet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. We talked about, before you got here, we talked about, it's on part 3, deficiencies and surpluses. And so we went through a quick list of things that, like, if you eat a very high kind of plant-based diet and don't have a lot of foods that are rich in certain things, like animal foods, your deficiencies, you'll be deficient in B6, B12, vitamin A, vitamin D3, K2, calcium, iron, EPA, DHA, cholesterol, carnosine, carnitine, iodine, taurine, and even things like protein. So you don't have enough of those things, and that can affect your health really poorly. And the surplus as would be things like soy, which you get a ton of, vegetable oils, which we talked about in the past, processed foods, fake meat, and I argued also fiber. A lot of people I think are consuming too much fiber, and it's actually impacting them negatively. Excellent. So those are, again, the plant side of things. Remember, the argument is not that you shouldn't have these in the diet. They can be beneficial. What makes us special as humans is that we can process these things and make them healthier for us. One of the things that Bill talks about in his book is corn, and a process called nixtamalization, which is hard to find. But if you go, like he traveled to Mexico City to find people that were traditionally making corn tortillas, it's like a 2-day process of like soaking and like drying out this ingredient so that then you can use it for masa, which then can be a healthy ingredient in tortillas, which in so many of these cultures that eat these foods, if you look at the way they eat foods, like, yes, people in South America eat lots of potatoes because they eat potatoes with clay in certain areas because they know that it needs to bind with the chemicals in potatoes. Corn is like a tiny grass. It doesn't look like what we think of as corn today since we've changed it so much. But you go through this process to extract the nutrients from the corn to make it nutrient-based. Most people eat corn that we know of as corn, and it's kind of a funny thing, but you notice the next day, when you go number 2, you see all the corn, it looks exactly the same. Your body didn't even absorb any of the potential nutrients that were in there because we're not using these traditional processes. When we made bread, we fermented the bread and made sourdough. Now we don't do any of that. So it's just to say, like, if you're going to consume plants, you just need to do it in a way that you're thinking about, how am I going to cook this? How am I going to soak this? How am I going to detoxify this in the way that makes this food nutrient dense and then safe? On that note, I've mentioned many times that I am trying to make this as diet agnostic as absolutely possible, meaning I am not trying to recommend that people eat a certain diet. The point of the next 2 kind of things that we're going to be talking about have to do with the carnivore diet. And the point I'm trying to make here is not that you should do a carnivore diet. It's that there are now tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that are doing a carnivore diet, and they are thriving. All of this is to say that one option you can have for certain plant foods, or maybe in particular all plant foods, is the avoidance of all of them. And so the next topic is, will you die without eating plants? The answer to that question is yes, you're going to die, because everybody's going to die, so that doesn't exclude you, but can you live a healthy life without eating any plants at all? We know that there's certain cultures in the world that have to rely on solely animal food for their subsistence and have done so for thousands and thousands of years. We used to call them Eskimos. We don't anymore. We call them Inuits. We know that people at certain latitudes on the planet did not have any access to any plant foods, or at least for great portions of the year where they could not, as much as they wanted to eat salad, that would not have been an option for them to eat any. And they have subsisted perfectly well on whale blubber, meat from caribou, only subsisting on animal products, in particular meat, organs, that kind of thing. The picture that you see is of our species basically like evolving, and the different timelines in which we evolved. And so I just want to point a few key things out. The thing that really kind of started our human evolution is what you see at the very top left. The first thing that you see, which is the first time a human took a rock and smashed it against another rock and made a really sharp end, was the first time we invented tools. And that tool meant that we didn't have to evolve with fangs or claws or anything really sharp to cut into our, whatever we wanted to eat. We had a tool, and that tool was much more efficient. That's what really started us down the path of Homo sapien, and our brains started to grow. So you see that in 2.6 million years ago, when we invented tools, our brains were at 650 cc. By the time about 1.9 million years ago, we started to invent the most simple weapon, which was a spear, basically a really sharp stick, and our brains had grown to about 1,000 cc. Over time, we learned more and more advanced ways of hunting. We invented more sophisticated technology. Spears turned into bows and arrows and atlatls and different things that would project, mostly because we were over hunting all the big game that was really easy to hunt, and we had to hunt smaller and smaller, more agile animals. We needed better hunting weapons, and we needed the help of things like dogs to be able to help us hunt. All the way to the point where our brains maxed out at about 1500 cc. And once we started agriculture about 10,000 years ago, we started to rely more on plants for our food, and our brain sizes, since we started agriculture, have actually been shrinking. So we maxed out on brain size about 10 to 15,000 years ago, and our brains are now smaller than we are now. The person who put out this paper, his name is Dr. Mickey Bendor, one of my absolute favorite people. He was in economics and made quite a bit of money, quite successful, until he was age 52. And at 52, he decided that what he was doing wasn't interesting to him anymore. So he stopped his job, went back to school, got his PhD as an archaeologist, a paleoarchaeologist, because he wanted to study the Paleolithic and our human evolution. So talk about a cool dude who completely, left his career to go study something that he wanted to, and has spent a lot of time contemplating like how we've evolved, what kind of creature we are. I've asked him directly, are we omnivores? And he unequivocally says, yes, humans are omnivores. We eat plants and we eat animals. But animals don't have a 50-50 split. Animals in nature, most of them are all omnivores, but most of them also specialize in one or the other. So like a wolf can eat berries, but that's not the main source of its calories. A bear can have honey and also some berries at the end of the season. Salmon is the main kind of course for the grizzly bear. And part of his research, he put together a document called Are We Carnivores? You can find this online. If you message me, I can message this to you. But this is just, again, not looking at what nutrition preferences are, what you like to eat, what food tastes good to you. This is just comparing humans and different features of humans and whether we compare more to animals that eat animals or animals that eat plants. I'm going to go through a few of these. He kind of goes through a different life cycle here. So one thing that we have in common with other carnivores is we wean like carnivores. Let's see. Humans were found to be in the carnivore group, while chimpanzees and other primates were in the non-carnivores. The explanation they provide is that external food of carnivores is much more similar to the milk of the mothers, so a shorter adjustment of time is sufficient. So we don't wean as long as a lot of herbivores. We have many smaller fat cells, like all carnivores. This is the way animals store fat. You can have a lot of little fat cells or very few big fat cells. We line up like carnivores. The stomach acidity is really, really interesting. Stomach acidity is exactly that. It's how much acid you have in your stomach. So an herbivore would have an acidity of around like a 5 or a 6. It's much more alkaline. Other animals that are more omnivore are around a 3. Carnivores are around like a 2, 2.5. And we have stomachs that are so acidic, we actually line up with scavengers, which is about as acidic as you can get, which means we can eat not only meat, but also meat that has been going bad when we have healthy stomachs. Now this is really important and something that we can maintain, but it's like a big brain. It's very expensive. And so it requires a lot of energy to have an acidic stomach. And the question is, why would our bodies waste a lot of calories to have a high acidity if we weren't also aligned with, again, animals or even more closely related to scavengers? The reduced energy extraction capacity from plants, this has to do with our gut size. This is why we don't have fermenting guts. A lot of animals like cows and sheep and deer and elk, they have rumens, which are these giant chambers, which is why their guts hang so big, and they eat grass. They don't chew. What they chew is the what's it called? The cud that they're regurgitating from these stomachs that are then fermenting their food. And the only place that our digestive tract ferments food is in the large colon, which our large colon is very, very small. Definitely more in line with carnivores and way less in line with herbivores who can extract energy from food way better than we can. We can't do that. Endurance running. Humans are able to run great distances without without needing a lot of food. If you just watch the Olympics, you saw the marathon, 26 miles is quite a long time to run, which means we can chase down other prey. You don't need to do that if you're an herbivore. Plants are stationary. Ability to throw a spear, so we can't hang as much as our primate ancestors like monkeys. We don't hang like monkeys, but we can throw 3 to 5 times faster than a monkey can throw, which would suggest we developed that for hunting purposes. We store tons of fat, which is a good way to say we can live on fat for a very long time. We have an incomplete adaptation to metabolize starch, so we're not very good at metabolizing starch. It says our recent genetic adaptation to tubers is very recent. We never really had cavities until about 1,500 years ago, and that's when we started consuming more plants in the diet in agriculture. Before that, when we look at skulls that were more hunter-gatherers, we never had cavities. Anyway, this paper goes on and on to suggest all the different reasons why we line up with other carnivores much more closely than we do with herbivores. Again, we are omnivores. We can eat both plants and animals. So that is, either one is an option, but if you look at the way we are set up as humans, we do line up a lot better with carnivores. And I'll just kind of go on a personal note here. I'm going to tell you my personal experience with some of this stuff. I was a personal trainer. I've been a personal trainer since 2007. I was taught the exact opposite of what this is. Plants are good. Eat as much spinach as possible. Have all the almonds. Salad is great. You should have small meals spread out throughout the day. You should do meal prepping. And I did it. I did it for myself. I did it for my clients. And what I noticed over and over and over again is it would fail. It wouldn't work. People couldn't do it. They got really hungry. Their cravings increased. They maybe lost a little bit of weight, but their food is going bad in the fridge for all the prepping that they did and all these snacks they made for themselves. They stopped tasting good. The food would go bad. People would throw the food away. They would be craving, again, things like donuts and all this stuff, and they would not be able to stick with the diet. And I would just think as a personal trainer, like, you suck at following the advice. I'm giving you the best advice. It's what my nutrition coach or my nutrition certification tells me to tell you. You're not counting your calories well enough. You're not getting a rainbow of vegetables. It just would never work for people. And through the company we were working at the time doing weight loss challenges, I started to find that the opposite advice, eating lots of cholesterol, eating lots of meat, was working for people. And people stopped becoming hungry, and they started to feel really full, and their energy would get better, and they would lose weight. And they wouldn't just lose all weight, because we measured it in our weight loss contest where people would maintain their muscle, but they would lose fat. And nobody did that before when they were eating the way that we were telling them to eat. And that's how we learned about low carbohydrate diets and eventually ketogenic diets, where people could be eating a very low amount of carbohydrate and be in a state where their body is burning fat and making ketones. And they were noticing all kinds of different benefits. So we started trying that with our clients, hugely successful. I was listening to a podcast late 2017 or early 2018 with a doctor. His name is Dr. Sean Baker, in his mid-50s, orthopedic surgeon, and he was setting records for his age category for rowing and deadlifting. And he said that in the last few years, the only food he had eaten was ribeyes with salt. And he didn't eat any vegetables, and he didn't care what his blood work said, because he felt the best he's ever felt in his entire life, and he was physically thriving. And I listened to this podcast with this absolute nut job, and I turned it off halfway through, and it wasn't even until last year that I even went back and listened to the whole interview. Over time, I started to learn about this very peculiar diet with a subset of people. Usually they were suffering from some chronic condition, and they were eating exclusively meat. No plants whatsoever. They weren't eating any vegetables. Blew my mind. No fruit, no grains, definitely no of the things that we talked about as being the least healthy. No seed oils, no sugar, no grains, no bread, nothing. They were only eating meat and reporting that they were feeling amazing. It took me a while for me to come around to this, but I decided in April of 2019, on the 1st of April, I decided to try a 30-day experiment of a carnivore diet where I'm just going to see, am I going to die of a heart attack? Am I going to never poop? I don't know. I'm just going to try it for 30 days. Within about 2 weeks, I noticed that anxiety that I didn't think I had was gone. I felt happier, much more calm. I could deal with things much better, problem solve way better. I was way less hungry. I could eat once or twice a day, easily fast for 24-hour periods, which I'm doing right now. I feel fine. Um, and it was really quite cool. I found it to be very inexpensive, very easy. And I decided, like, on May 1st, I feel great. I'm definitely not pooping as much as I used to, but I still go. It's just like my body is using all the food that I'm giving it, and there's no waste product. My digestion's great. Like, my energy is awesome. I'm not tied to food. I feel great. And I wanted to continue learning about this. Eventually, this podcast that I listened to, I ended up working for that company. I got certified after the pandemic happened in 2020. Got certified on this guy's platform called MeetRx. I was on a platform that for several years, they don't do it anymore, but for several years, people around the world were hiring me to coach them on how to do a carnivore diet. And I got to teach people all over the place around it. We started the podcast. We just finished our 700th episode. We have 500,000 downloads worldwide. Again, 700 episodes largely of talking to people about this topic in every which way, how we evolved, what plants do in the body, how they affect our mental health, how they affect our gut health. And I have encountered story after story after story after story of people trying this insane, weird, bizarre diet and feeling the best they've ever felt, feeling like they're aging backwards. I've met 70-year-olds who do cartwheels on the beach and have like no body fat, and their skin is glowing, and their gut issues have gone away. They digest their food perfectly well. I have friends who are bipolar. We talked about Robin last week. If you're here next week, if all goes well, Robin's husband visiting from Texas is going to be here, so he's going to talk to us about mental health and how this type of diet has impacted his wife. His wife being very severely bipolar, medicated for her entire life, half sedated. They eventually find this type of a diet and try it. Robin is a joy. She's off all of her medications. She is not bipolar anymore. It is gone. She's perfectly capable. I've hung out with her at several different conferences. I'll see her in 2 days in San Diego for a conference I'm going to. She does not have bipolar anymore. She eats only meat. Matt, her husband, has lost 100 pounds. He looks great. He used to be over 300 pounds. He's on his journey to become under 200 pounds. He feels amazing. All he eats is meat. One of the doctors who's going to be presenting at this conference that I'm going to next week, her name is Dr. Georgia Eid. She went to Harvard University to study mental disorders, prescribing lots of medications for people. She had some weight to lose and decided to try herself a diet that was very high in animal foods. And she just noticed she didn't react very well to plants. And so eventually she just started eating only animal foods. And she noticed drastic improvements in her own mental health and led her to write a book called Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, which we'll be discussing next week. And she now uses she uses all diets. She can do this with a vegan diet, although it's much, much harder. She uses a carnivore diet to help people with mental issues nurture the brain and eliminate all the things that can produce a lot of inflammation, namely a lot of plant foods. And she thrives on a carnivore diet. The study that I'm going to read to you, these results are from, I will admit right off the bat, a very poor quality study. This is a survey. So all you're doing is asking people if you think something is one way or another. So very poor quality. This was done by Harvard Medical School and published in 2021. Another thing to point out, this is about, I think, just over 2,000 people. These are people that have self-reported being on the carnivore diet. So again, these are people that are likely to be very favorable because they're currently eating that way. So take this with a grain of salt. It's just when the numbers get this big, you have to start asking questions about like, okay, this is a poor study, but these numbers are huge. Maybe there's something here. Percentage of patients who resolved or improved chronic health problems consuming an animal-based diet. 89% of people improved their autoimmune disease. 93% improved their obesity and increased body weight. 80% of people fixed their low body weight. That's interesting that some people ate this way and lost weight, and other people ate this way and gained weight. Most people that I coach seem to normalize either underweight, you gain, or lose weight to get rid of excess fat. 93% of people improved their hypertension. 98% of people improved their diabetes and insulin resistance. 97% of people improved their gastrointestinal disorders. 88% of people improved their endocrine problems. And a whopping 96% of people improved their brain fog. This is extremely, extremely consistent with what I see with the people that I coach on this particular diet. Again, the point of this is not to promote an all-meat diet. The point is to say people are doing this. One alternate to soaking, fermenting, cooking, preparing, doing all these things to plant foods to detoxify them. One alternative to doing that is say, you know what? I'm going to skip the whole thing and I'm not going to have any amount or very low amount of plant foods in my diet. And I have literally, I know this sounds like hyperbole, but I see miracles every single day of people that drastically improve their diets and lives. I was just hosted on a podcast this morning with a guy in Japan who does a podcast called The Zero Carb Life. He was sharing with me his story about finding this diet. He's completely cured all of his health issues and ailments. Every single day he was eating 8 eggs, bacon, but he was having a small side of peppers, yellow peppers and green peppers in his breakfast. I would listen to if you told me you were eating that, I would say don't change. That sounds amazing. That sounds super healthy and great. Keep going. That small amount of peppers for him he was so sensitive that was still causing him gut issues. And only when he eliminated a small amount of peppers did he completely resolve digestive issues. Again, you just wouldn't think that a small amount of some of these foods would cause so much damage, but I talk to people all day, every day, who end up finding that to be the case. So again, all that to say, I'm not promoting that as the diet that everybody should do. It is to say people like myself have found amazing healing and health and benefit where I was told to avoid cholesterol, avoid saturated fat, don't eat red meat, eat vegetables and salads. I literally have not had, besides some fermented vegetables, I've had like no measurable amount of vegetable in 5 years, 5.5 years since I started. Feel pretty fine. I did a heart scan. I've got a 0 CIC score. I have almost no visceral fat. I feel way better now at 40 than I did at 30. It's nuts.
You do the calcium cardio, the scan.
Calcium artery coronary score.
Yeah,
Yep.
I just did one yesterday.
Oh, nice.
So, and mine has been 0, but we'll see.
Yeah, when you get your results.
Well, I don't see the cardiologist until September, so
Okay.
I'm thinking, but I'm interested to see what he has to say about
The best.
Because they always say Mediterranean diet, Mediterranean.
Yep.
But
Yep.
you know,
You cannot reverse you cannot reverse arterial calcium. You can't reverse it. The best thing you can do is make it stop and make it not progress. Just talked to a woman 2 weeks ago who went on a carnivore diet. She's been doing these tests every few years. She did a score off of the diet where she scored a 200 and something. She just did another one recently where the score was a 16. She literally disproved that you can reverse artery calcium by this test. She did it, and she only eats meat. I hear stories like that all the time. I'll tell you again, personally, I had chronic athlete's foot. I always had athlete's foot. That went away. I used to get gnarly sunburns. I have not worn a drop of sunscreen in years. I could be out in high noon sun all day. I'll get a little red, but I do not burn. I've not gotten one sunburn since eating this way. I usually eat once or twice a day. I've got that 0 calcium score. I've got great energy all day. I still skate just as fast as the 20-year-olds on my ice hockey. They all think I'm nuts because they know what I do, and they think it's absolutely crazy, which is the appropriate response. That's exactly what you should be thinking. I feel better now than I have in my 30s, hands down. I have no intention of stopping. And the last thing I'll kind of conclude on, this doctor that I've now been able to meet and interview totally changed my life, Dr. Baker. He will go to the front of a conference center is very similar again to the conference I'm going to be going to this weekend. He'll go to the front and I'll ask everybody in the audience to raise their arms. And so I'll always run to the front too. I'll always run to the front and look back because I want to see how many people respond. And he'll say, everybody in the audience, raise your arms. Everybody raise their arms. 1,000 people, 2,000 people, however many. And he'll say, leave your arm up if recently you've been eating more meat and less vegetables than you used to. and most of the arms stay up. And he'll ask, keep your arms raised if you feel better now eating more meat, and most of the arms stay up. And he'll say, keep your arms raised if you feel better not eating as many of the vegetables that you used to, and almost all the arms stay up. And he says, if I'm wrong about cholesterol and you're going to die tomorrow and we got it all wrong, how many of you are willing to stop doing this diet or how many of you are willing to change your diet right now from eating more meat and less vegetables? Is going to kill you tomorrow. It's incredible. Every time it's like 2 hands go down, and I'm right there with him. Like I would not, if you told me I would die tomorrow, I would so much rather do it happy without anxiety than I did before. Having all that anxiety, I would not care. Again, the point of that is to say it is an option. Plant foods, carbohydrates are not essential to the diet. You don't need any of them. I know people that have eaten this way for decades and they feel amazing. You can try it and see what you think, and you can try it with just one day. Try a meal. Try a plate of eggs and try eating with bacon and see if you can skip the other things and see what you feel. If you really miss having more things, you always add them in your next meal. You can try it with burger patties or a steak, where you go to a steakhouse, order a big old steak, and just see what it's like not to have the sides. And you can see, was I full? Did I feel really good? Did my brain feel good? You might not, and you don't ever have to do it for as long as I did. Certainly like a 30-day trial. You can start with just one day or just one meal. I definitely encourage people to try and see what they think. And yeah, I see some pretty cool stuff there. So again, the whole point of this message is to say, when it comes to plants and plant toxins, plants fight back. Be aware of that. Do things to detoxify. Choose things like fruits. You can eat things seasonally. All the methods of preparation, like we said, fermenting, cooking, soaking, sprouting, are all great ways to help detoxify plants. The dose makes the poison, so having a little versus having a lot can make a big difference. Do not make spinach smoothies in the morning, concentrating a lot of spinach in a smoothie. Liam Hemsworth, is that an actor, Liam Hemsworth? Yeah, he was in the hospital a few years ago because he did that. Completely almost trashed his kidneys. Had to go to the hospital because he was eating a spinach smoothie in the morning with 5 handfuls of spinach. Yeah, don't do that. Find ways to detoxify the plants that you do consume. Be mindful of that. Again, fruits are going to be your most toxic, the least toxic plants you can have. They just have a lot of sugar. But again, you're benefiting the plant when you have fruit. And also to say, eating less plants or even excluding plants will not kill you. You can live a very long, healthy life just skipping the whole rigmarole. That's the whole thing.
Well, like you said, spinach, but what about lettuce in the same?
Substitutions. Lettuce is one of the most very benign foods that you can eat. That's a great substitution. There's lots of different versions of spinach.
Yeah.
And even things like kale have way less oxalate than things like spinach. So yes, tons and tons and tons of different things that you can substitute. This is an accumulation problem. It's not to like, I don't want people to think that like, oh my goodness, I look at a spinach salad as a toxic load. I see no redeeming quality in spinach. But that's not to say if you have a spinach salad, you're going to die. You're not. It's just that it builds up over a long time. And if you feel like, why do I have joint pain? Why am I forgetting things? Why do I have sexual dysfunction? Why does my gut hurt? Or I'm getting flatulence, or I'm belching and I'm getting hiccups that are uncomfortable. It might be coming from your food, and that might be where you get that. So yes, substitution is another amazing thing that you can look at. Like I said, if you need resources around this, her book is amazing. That has lots of charts. I have charts I can send you that are just like a high oxalate list and a low oxalate list. As you saw with the lectin book, just because something is low in lectins doesn't mean it's not also high in oxalates or other plant chemicals. There will always be a question, but at the end of the day, just being really mindful that your plants have toxins that need to be dealt with, and you can't just go out and eat them without punishment.
Wow, that's a changer.
It's the weirdest.
An option between lettuce and spinach, I would pick the spinach because I always thought that was better.
Hands down, better. No question it was better. Yeah. But,
wow.
And again, I think like when I was growing up, like the spinach that I would have would be spinach with lemon. And the reason my mom made me maybe have that and it tasted good, maybe was because I was, without knowing it, obviously, like dealing with the bad components of spinach, which literally like oxalate crystals have been used in cleaning products for like 150 years to clean off rust. That's how bad these things are. But also, I've asked Sally this question too. As a kid, I did not like milk. I think I was lactose intolerant, and I was colicky as a baby. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
You call it? I'd always cry and whatever.
Yeah.
So I could not tolerate milk. But when I had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, I ate a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I craved milk. And I asked Sally, I'm like, was it the peanuts that then made me crave the dairy, and I wanted to drink the milk because it had the calcium? And she thinks like,
Washes it down.
yeah. But I would drink like water, Kool-Aid or Tang or anything over milk. And we were, my mom had been diagnosed with cancer, so we were on the low fat kick. So we were eating tons of sugar, and we were on skim milk. So the milk we were drinking was super gross anyway. But I wondered if I was craving milk when I had peanuts, because peanuts are high in oxalate, and the dairy has the calcium that would help bind to the oxalate. So maybe that was a natural craving.
Peanut butter? I love peanut butter.
I had so many peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and they weren't like what I would call peanut butter now, where it's like peanuts and salt, but it was like Jiffy and Skip and like all the sugary, yeah. Anyway.